Good evening and welcome back, everybody. As I said, we are here with Negotiating Cultural Appropriation, Lineage, Teaching, and Relationships. We are at part 3 in a 4-part series of community-driven and source technical assistance workshops brought to you by the Philadelphia Folklore Project in partnership with the American Folklore Society and Urban Artistry. My name is Naomi Stern-Vijaysinha, and I am the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Folklore Project here out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I know we've got many friends and family of all these organizations in the audience, but for those who are perhaps less familiar, the Philadelphia Folklore Project has been around since 1987. And for the past 34 years, our slogan has been Folk Arts for Social Change. So part and parcel to our mission is that we work very deeply in and in partnership with communities in Philadelphia and the 5 surrounding counties to harness traditional knowledge, to be problem solvers, and in service of social change issues. So we are an independent folk and traditional arts nonprofit, and we have a particular focus on social justice as part of our mission, using traditional knowledge and traditional culture and all the superpowers that we truly carry with us on a daily basis, which is, for lack of other definition, folk life, to build the world around us that we want to see for ourselves and for our communities. And so that sets us up really well for today. One of the ways that we have been working for many years to reach this mission of Folk Arts for Social Change since 1987 has been to offer a series of technical assistance workshops annually as part of a folk arts partnership with the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. And so some of these workshops each year have to do with grant opportunities, funding opportunities for artists, and a lot of application assistance for these grants, whether they be for individual projects, folk art apprenticeships through the state, and other, really important opportunities for tradition bearers in our midst. But in addition to that, we try to have a themed program that is based off of community requests for new kinds of knowledge. In the past, those have been things such as how to represent yourself as a traditional artist on social media, how to build a compelling pitch for a project. And this year, actually, the topic of cultural appropriation, I say it's community driven and sourced because it really truly did come from the community in Philadelphia at request of PFP to focus in on this issue. And 2 of the masterminds behind the project, actually one of them is on the panel today and is also a staff member of the Folklore Project, Cinta Penyami Storms, as well as our consultant on this whole series, Madhu Smita Bora, 2 traditional artists, 2 traditional Southeast and South Asian dance artists came to us and said that they had had some experiences in the local community with issues on cultural appropriation and some of their own dance traditions and didn't really know how to navigate that. And so the question came up was, could PFP focus in on this issue and build some language, build a toolbox, and have really important conversations with other artists and other individuals around these issues, because we know it's not a black and white issue, but it's a very pertinent one and a very timely one, and sometimes a bit hard to navigate, particularly when it comes to, not wanting to point blame or really discourage people from participation, but seeing really big issues with cultural politics happening around us in our communities. And so I was very grateful that they came to us, and we were able to focus in on this topic for this 4-part series. And it was such a popular topic, actually, that it became a national conversation because the American Folklore Society, by way of its Cultural Diversity Committee, and then also Urban Artistry, a national grassroots street dance organization, jumped on board and wanted to be a part as well. And that, provided funding that allowed us to open it up and have really diverse panels with at least one guest on each one who's coming in from outside Philadelphia and adding to that conversation. So it's really, really exciting. I'd like to thank everybody who's made it possible. I'm going to give some more specific thank yous in a moment. But to start that off, I'd like to really thank our staff. So I have the honor of introducing the program, but I have not been doing the heavy lifting for this. And that has come from our Folk Arts and Social Change Fellow, Eric Cesar Morales, as well as Cinta Penyami Storms, who I mentioned, and Madhu Smita Bora, who is not on staff, but a consultant for this project and a longtime contributor to the Philadelphia Folklore Project. So I would like to give them a virtual round of applause for all the important work they have put into producing this series. And I'd also like, again, to thank the money people who have made all of this possible and made it possible for us to continue to compensate our artists and community members, and that's a big part of our mission as well. So the bulk of this series comes to us from our folk arts partnership with Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, but also with associated support from Urban Artistry and the American Folklore Society. So a big round of applause for them as well. And I'm so happy that we've been able to have this 4-part series, and we're already at part 3. So we're in that home stretch. Today's topic is about community relationships. The past 2 episodes have been first about forming cultural lineages and then about teaching culture. And the idea is, we know that issues around cultural appropriation are hardly a black and white issue, particularly in the very diverse and globalized world in which we live today. But when, I was speaking with a viewer not so long ago, actually, after our last panel, and they said, well, what's the takeaway? What is cultural appropriation, Naomi? How do I really know when this is happening? And I, when thinking about that, I think that today's topic is really very pertinent, because I think so much of cultural appropriation really does have to do with one's relationship to community, how embedded somebody is, what the give and the take is. And all these topics are really very connected. So how you place yourself within a cultural lineage, how you think about yourself as an inheritor of tradition, teaching culture, passing it forward, paying it forward. And I guess that all, really relates to this idea of community relationships. So we have an all-star panel, as usual, lined up today, which will be moderated by the great Lamont Jack Pearley. And our panelists include Lanika Angpak, Tyler Hughes, Cinta Penyami Storms, and Rosa Ruiz. So I'm going to let you get down to business with them in just a moment. And Lamont, are you ready there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm ready.
Okay, excellent. So I'm really excited to sit back and enjoy. I can't wait to introduce you to Lamont Jack Pearley. He did convince me to wear this hat for you today. We had a conversation right before the panel about whether we should all wear cultural dress and how that pertained to some of us. Some of us had much more impressive cultural dress than others. And I think that that's an interesting lead up into topics of cultural appropriation. But I couldn't decide what my outfit should be. So I went with my my steadfast Brooklyn Dodgers hat. So I'm wearing a hat of a baseball team that is very important in my family and yet no longer exists. So I don't know what that means about me and cultural appropriation, but I'll let Lamont and all of our friends discuss that and other much more interesting things at length. So without further ado, I give you the Mr. Lamont Jack Pearley.
Thank you, Naomi. How's everyone doing this evening? I must say that in regards to that Brooklyn Dodgers hat, right, there's a humongous culture behind that from Brooklyn, where I was born and raised. Also, the hip hop community, also the area of Brooklyn I was raised in, which is Crown Heights, where Ebbets Field used to be, and it became a housing projects, which the entire generational culture of the Brooklyn Dodgers run deep in that community. But that's neither here nor there. So because I asked Naomi to wear that hat, I have to wear my Blues Music Magazine hat, and we're color coordinated. So that's another folk group thing, but I don't want to nerd out on you guys too much. So my name is Lamont Jack Pearley. Before I introduce myself, I think it's more important to introduce our fabulous panel and allow them to introduce themselves to you all. So we're going to start with Lanika. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lanika Ongfa. I am a second generation Cambodian American woman here in Philadelphia. I'm also a classical and folk dance artist. I perform and teach here in Philadelphia, and I also run my own little performing arts nonprofit.
We appreciate you being here and everything that you're doing. Next, I think a lot has been said about her already, but we're going to let her say some more. Cinta, please.
Thank you so much, everybody. So honored to be here with all these amazing artists. My name is Sinta Storms, and I am a traditional Indonesian dance artist specializing in Javanese, Balinese, and Sulawesi dance. So today I'm rocking my Pomonian headdress that my mom made that I haven't seen for 2 years now because of the pandemic. So thank you so much. I'm also one of the community leaders in the Indonesian community here. And also, just like Lanika, have a small community dance group here in Philadelphia with about 20 students. So I'm excited to be here.
Again, we applaud all the work that you're doing. Next up, Ms. Rosa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rosa Ruiz, and I've been living in the United States for around 20 years. I'm a folklore and Aztec dance, and also do the characterization of the iconic character of La Catrina. And I'm so excited to be part of this panel. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us. Next, we have Mr. Tyler.
Hey everyone, my name's Tyler Hughes. I live in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. I'm a banjo player and a square dance caller. I work as part-time as an adjunct faculty music instructor at the local community college here, and I'm also very involved with the cultural arts tourism scene that's growing in southwestern Virginia. So.
We definitely appreciate you. That is not an easy task to be a square dance caller. So that we're going to get into the responsibility of what you guys are doing. But before we do that, I just to give my a brief bio on myself. Again, I'm Lamont Jack Pearley. Blues Music Magazine. The reason why blues is very important to me, I am a first generation New Yorker. My parents got to New York late, but I'm a child of the Great Migration. And with the migration came the blues and the Black spirituals. My roots started in Mississippi and Louisiana. And in Brooklyn, New York, my family, 3 generations continues that. I'm an applied folklorist. I use my ethnographic Black folk narrative to create change. I publish a newspaper called the African American Folklorist, and I host and produce a weekend segment on NPR WKU Public Radio called the African American Folklorist. And I am what I like to call a traditional, African American traditional music practitioner and historian. So I play the blues. Now, with that being said, we have a video prepared for you all so you can see some of the wonderful things that we do. Drop to my knees, low up me, while black folk dying by the hand of police. Drop to my knees, low talk to me.
All my flowers Para mí es importante promover mi cultura aquí en Estados Unidos como lo fuera en cualquier otra parte del mundo, porque por lo menos para mí significa que estoy arraigada todavía a mi lugar de origen, a mis tradiciones, a mi cultura, a mis ancestros, se puede decir. Y es algo que yo quisiera que mis hijos principalmente lo vivieran, porque es algo muy bonito saber de dónde vienes, porque automáticamente puedes saber hacia dónde vas.
Wonderful. So we're going to jump into this. And I want to, because I'm going to jump around here. So I have I got some questions here. So I'm going to jump around. But before I get to this one particular question, I just want to share a story. And then from that story, I will ask this first question specifically because everything our panel does is based around community engagement, right? And the term community and engagement varies because you have a community of people that the actual art form or expression comes from. Then you have a community of people that engage in said culture. In New York, I took part in a blues dance festival/workshop. Now, not as a dancer, obviously, but you know, I played the music and I gave a lecture. And in one of the music sections with the dancers, the instructor got a little frustrated because she's very serious about honoring and respecting all of the cultural dances that she represents. So she was trying to explain some things to the students or the people who took part in the workshop. And this one gentleman said, well, I don't understand. Why do I need to know these things? I just want to come socialize. As someone tenured in this space, mature in this space, I did not receive that incorrectly because that could, you know, we live what we do. Right? We live, we breathe our tradition. This is not something we woke up one day. This is something that was passed down, in some cases unofficially. But I understood. He wanted to understand why he needed to know about the Black experience in America to have to do this dance, because he just wanted to come and socialize. Now, with that being said, my question to you all, whoever wishes to answer first, please. As a practitioner, because you're not just teachers, right? You're active members. As a practitioner and a representative of a particular culture, tribe, tradition, and folk group, what are the responsibilities of those who transmit these expressions? What are your responsibilities to the community you represent and to the communities that you teach that are outside of the culture?
First of all, it's probably for me, if someone were to come to my class and wanting to experience the traditional dance and saying that, why do I need to know all these things? The reason why I'm doing this in Philadelphia is because there is no cultural connection from my community to our home country. Through dance, through food is like a wealth of places where you can get Indonesian food and then other Southeast Asian food. But through dance, we're the only people who is bringing this, right? So it's important that you come to my class and learning about my culture, especially if you're not Indonesian, to know why we do certain things, because then you're showing me that you are respecting my culture, that you really want to learn this, not to, especially if you're coming to perform and be a part of a performance troupe, You have to know why we have to do certain things, because it is a part of tradition. It is a part of culture. Why are we smiling without showing teeth? There's a reason why we're doing that, because typically all these dances that we perform is a court dance, is we perform for the kings and queens, right? So we don't smile showing our teeth. Like, this is not how we do things, because it's considered aggressive and considered disrespectful back in the day. And then we just still do that to continue the tradition. So why are we wearing sarong or kain? Because this is how the tradition is. Like, you can come and practice, but even so, when you come to practice, there are certain things that you have to do. And actually, it will make you feel a little bit more connected to the culture if you will learn all these things, you know. Certain dances also have certain stories. So you have to really embody like these stories. Like, why are you supposed to be looking sad? Why are you supposed to be happy? You know, like, why your hand's supposed to be certain ways? Maybe because if it's not certain ways, maybe it's disrespectful. So I think it's important to have an open mind. It doesn't mean you suddenly gonna become a master of this culture. I don't call myself a master artist either. So I'm still learning myself. So I think it's just showing respect to the people who are there and showing respect to the culture. That would be my 2 cents.
Anyone else wish to chime in on that particular question?
I could speak, especially about the community you come from and the community you're trying to teach here in the mountains in Virginia. Oftentimes I find that's one and the same. We know that all over the world, culture is often taken and changed or watered down or manipulated so that an outside force can get control of a certain population, oftentimes for natural resources. We're very familiar with that here in the coal mining region of Virginia. So I find students all the time who come to class who say, I want to play the banjo. You know, my grandfather played the banjo, but nobody else has learned since him, or nobody else has learned to play the fiddle since, you know, my grandfather did. And then they turn around and they say, well, I want to play that song from Deliverance. So even the community itself has this really kind of warped vision of what its own culture should be. So I think we have a responsibility to tell the truth, and the truth can empower those communities. So much of the music from the Appalachian region focuses on the labor struggles between the working class people who were here and how they had to essentially fight back against coal companies who were just bearing down on them with bad labor practices and bad environmental practices. And so I think if we're able to tell the truth, we can empower people to say, here's how it was in the past. You know, the problems of today are not that different than they were 50 or 100 years ago. So we can still use our art as a tool to organize communities as well.
Tyler, I love what you said about truth telling with the art form, because it's a really big part of the way that I engage community whenever anyone new, or even if it's folks from within my own, like the Cambodian community or the Southeast Asian community. It's important for folks to know that in Cambodia, we almost completely lost all of our cultural bearers. We almost lost all of our artists due to genocide. And if we don't acknowledge that part of our history, and if we don't acknowledge the great length it took for me as a second generation person to learn this dance and be able to teach it to others, then the depth of our culture is lost and it becomes shallow. And that's never something that I would want to contribute to. And I hope that others would be able to add to the depth of our cultures. It will shift and it will adapt, but we cannot let go of that truth telling and the storytelling behind it.
In the case when I start with the folklore dance, at the beginning it was because I want to show my children who were born here part of my country. That was at the beginning. Then I noticed I learned more because sometimes I forgot some things that we used to do in Mexico. And that reminds me to give the honor to the people who dress like that, who dance like that. And that gives me the opportunity to show my community how was doing in my country, like my other Cinta and I forgot the name of the other guy. He's with me. Sorry. They say we need to respect the ways that they do it, original as the music, dance, and office. And for me, this is the thing I try to do with my children, especially, and with the community.
I love it. And the one thing that I received from all of your answers, there's a common thread through all of us. This is intergenerational, right? And we picked it up because this was something that was in our house that we wanted to share. And as we shared, we learned more, right? We connected more. There was something that was said. It was pretty much said about all four of you, but I have to dive into that. And it was Tyler's story, because I have a similar situation where when I began in what I called, not even in my mind, I publicly said I'm reintroducing the traditional music of my people to my people. And there was a plethora of folk who asked me, why are you promoting the slave music? Which blues is not a slave music. And I used to throw these programs in a place in Harlem. And a couple of friends of mine went and they played Piedmont blues, which is traditional music of the Piedmont region, pre-war style, if you're familiar with Mississippi John Hurt or Etta Baker, people like this. And they were introduced as to be playing music from the movie Roots. Needless to say, both scenarios are incorrect. And in both scenarios, my experience and my friend's experience, this was told to us by fellow Black people. Again, Tyler, your statement allowed me to reflect on that, because we have people of these cultures that really don't understand their connection to it, right? So if you will, ladies and gentlemen, share with us your experiences reconnecting these traditions to the people that it comes from, that you share this with. And as you share this, please share what surprised you, what disappointed you, as well as what made you feel happy, right, in those moments.
Oftentimes, especially in my courses that I teach a course here just called string band. So it's just taking folks who play the stringed instruments that are commonly associated with Appalachian music, banjo, fiddle, guitar, so on, and putting them together and teaching them how to play as a band. And I always try to give a little bit of background about the instrument that they're playing and how they've come together. One of the most beautiful things about Appalachian music is it really is sort of this microcosm of American culture. Our instruments, our songs, our dance come from all different places all across the world. The banjo is an African instrument. The fiddle is so closely associated with Europe. We have African American and Native American influence on our dance. And so I've always tried to really drive home that Appalachian music and Appalachian culture in general is this confluence of so many other cultures coming together. Which I think is a really great way to combat people's misconceptions that Appalachian culture is just purely white, that there has been no influence of people of color on the region or on the culture. And that if they have that thought that this is purely a white culture, then it just reinforces all those stereotypes about the dumb hillbilly who doesn't know better, the redneck who always votes against their best interest, and so on. So I think it's a really good way to break down other barriers. There are disappointments along the way too. You still see that pop culture is so powerful. You cannot get away from the power of pop culture. Sometimes it's good. If anyone is familiar with the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The folks who play Appalachian music often talk about the Oh Brother moment in the early 2000s. When that movie came out, we just had this massive influx of people who wanted to learn how to play string band music, who wanted to get back in touch with these rural aspects of American culture, particularly in the American South and the Appalachian region. So it was great. But at the same time, you still have people who, when they learn to play the guitar, learn to play the banjo, they want to sound just like that movie. They want to sound just like Man of Constant Sorrow when the characters are singing it. And that's a great version of that song. That is like a very stylized, very modern version, and very, very different from the original version that would have lived here in people's houses and was eventually recorded and slipped its way into the broader commercial world. So I think that's probably the most disappointing thing, is still seeing just how much commercialism and commodification of culture, it impedes on everyone's ability to kind of break through and see like folk music really does mean folk or folk dance. It means of the people and with the people and for the people. But we live in such a capitalist consumerist society here that often kind of blurs people's vision of that.
Lanika, please, could you answer that next and share if no, before we get to that, just answer that question. I don't want to confuse it.
Sure. So I think for me, it's always been an exciting challenge to engage young people in Cambodian classical and folk dance, because they'll look at me and they'll be like, I'm not Cambodian. And I look at them and I'm like, but baby, you are. And I am too. And it's this idea of I don't hyphen my identity, but it's sort of like a hyphenated identity of this being able to balance your Cambodian culture with your American culture. And what is that balance? And one of my greatest joys was being able to work with local artists here in Philadelphia, with local b-boys, and to mix the two types of dances together. I said, I need more kids in my classroom who are just interested in just being here. I don't need them to learn from me, but I just want them to be here so that they're at least next to the culture, that they're adjacent. And I had friends that were b-boys who are also Cambodian. My then boyfriend, who's now my husband, taught these kids how to b-boy upstairs, and I taught other kids how to dance Cambodian dance downstairs. And eventually the two groups said, why don't we just merge it? Like we merge our identities, we merge our language. Why don't we just merge the way that we dance? And it was like the best 2 to 3 years that I ever had in dance, was like being able to do that and see that being led by the children, by the students, and just being able to say like, oh, like here's the meaning of this hand gesture, or here's how we move our body in this way to tell this story or to say this thing, and to see them be able to adapt that in a way that really speaks to them.
I have to ask you, Lanika, about that, because that's some, a lot of American culture around the world, but American culture is like a melting pot of people in the community, and what you just explained happens all the time, right? Did the students or you or your husband begin naming these dances, giving it new names, the merged dances? Did you start giving it new names? Did a vernacular was birthed out of this?
Honestly, no. We just sort of just mixed everything together, and the choreography that we put together, we didn't name anything. I don't know. It never occurred to us to put a name on it or to claim it in that way, because I think for me, it didn't feel like something for me to claim. If it didn't naturally come out, I didn't want to force it.
As I'm teaching and I guess reintroducing what I know to the community, what my experience has been related to what Lanika said about a little pushback people, my students not necessarily saying, well, I'm not Indonesian, but if you know Indonesian dance, when you say Indonesian dance, Indonesia is so big. It's an archipelago, right? Like over 17,000 islands. So it's actually incorrect if I just say I'm a traditional Indonesian dancer, because there's so many. So I do explain to people I specialize in Balinese, Javanese, and Sulawesi dance. In Javanese and Balinese, the way I learned, and this is how I teach my students, is you have to wear a sarong and then you have to wear a corset. And it's tight, it's really tight. You can't breathe sometimes. And then you get a little pushback from the students saying like, why do I have to do this? It's hot. Can I just wear shorts? Well, we can't do that. And the corset is not about making you slim, but it's actually helping your posture. So there are certain things where your hips has to be going the other way of your elbows that it really helps that posture. So I get a little pushback on things like that. And then it's really tough when you're teaching classical dances, and for some people who are not familiar with the music, they get really bored fast. And then some of the students were put in my class by their parents because the parents just want the kids to learn and perform. And sometimes it's really tough to teach kids. And then the way I deal with things, just like Lanika, like I would warm up with hip hop music and then get them excited a little bit. And then we have to go back to it. And then the way I would explain certain hand movements and certain moves is I have to use English. And then there are certain moves that doesn't called washing your hands in English that I have to use. This is what we're calling it from now on, because you can relate to this better instead of me saying it in my traditional language, right? Or in Balinese or in Javanese, which is not my traditional language. I'm actually Pamonian from the island of Sulawesi. So some people think I'm Balinese, some people think I'm Javanese, I'm not. But I've been learning all my life. And so the way I teach my students is I hope the way my teacher were teaching me, but I can't even do that because my teacher walk around with wooden stick. So if my elbow's down, that wooden stick is like up my elbow. And then when you're little and you're learning such a slow dance, you want to fall asleep. Javanese dance is so slow that, just to pick up scarf, a selendang, it took like almost a minute. So for a 5-year-old, and I was a rambunctious 5-year-old, that was really sleep, like I'm asleep. So I have to explain this to my students. Like, look, I'm not going to walk around with wooden sticks, but I will walk around and fix your posture. So I get a little bit pushback, but this is when I have to explain to them, like, this is why we do things this way. And then the reason why I am actually molding your hands or touching your elbow is actually sharing my energy to you, so then you can perform better, or like whatever positive energy I have, I want to just give it to you as my students in the room.
I want to answer this as a student. When I start with the Aztec dance, the girl in charge to show me, that's Antakari Machi, she told me something like, Cinta say, you have to put a bandana, you have to put something around your belly for the posture, and you have to do this and do this. And I said, oh my God, this kind of looks foreign for me at the beginning, because I just want to, I just want to be with the feathers, with the outfits. And I didn't realize that all those things has a meaning. So when she teach me how to do it, how was the posture, how was the meaning of the feathers and all the stuff we use in the Aztec dance, I noticed that she's not from Mexico, that usually Aztec dance is original, kind of, I want to say that. She's from Chile. So when I know that, I was surprised. Oh my God, how she knows a lot of my culture that I didn't know. And that was because she takes her time to learn, to study, and that she can tell the people like me, like a Mexican people, how to do it. So for me, that's a very, very important thing that I learned from her, because that she is not from Mexico. She learns all those things like love like the Mexican people. So that means for me, all of us are just one. I love that.
I do too. And that's also like the most perfect segue to what we're about to discuss. The difference between culture vultures, cultural appropriation, and someone committed. We're going to discuss a few things about this, right? Because even when it comes to blues, to Black spirituals and things like, there's an influx of many white artists that revere this music. We can speak just to call off the top of my head someone people noticeable like Keith Richards and Mick Jagger, right? The Rolling Stones would not come on stage if they didn't bring Howlin' Wolf on stage at one point. So there's a moment, or there's a group of people that just really revere the culture, respect the culture, and the expression, take time, learn it, share it, right? But then there's another form, right? I would like to use the example of Rachel Dolezal. Do you all know who this is? And I don't utilize this story in humor, but more to seek information. She was so immersed into a culture, she not only took on the identity, but she classified herself as an African American, right? My question, now that I set this up, at what point is someone overstepping their bounds with this admiration? That's just the first question, and I'll let you guys answer that one first. In the situation of someone not necessarily of the tradition, culture, ethnicity, nationality, all of the above, folk group, but they revere it so much, at what point are they overstepping their bounds? I'm going to start with Lanica because she was shaking her head in agreement.
I was shaking my head to get an answer. But no, I can totally answer, or try to answer some thought to this. But I think for me, it comes to a point of there's a very fine and gray line. There's not a lot of contrast between the two. So I think it's hard to navigate. And sometimes people teeter between the two when they're trying to figure out where that line is. And I think it really gets to a point of when someone starts to say, I don't care. If someone, like if I were to speak to a student and tell them, hey, like this is a little too much, or like, here's this meaning, like, can you do it this way instead? This is the proper way. And someone says to me, I don't care. That's that line for me of like, oh, like you don't actually care for the technique or the tradition, but you just care for just like doing it and like showing people that you can do it, but not necessarily following through with the teaching that's being offered to you. So when you no longer care about the thing that's being offered to you, then it's like, I just won't offer it again. Like as soon as I hear that I'm the type of teacher that's like, okay, I just won't offer it again. And I'll wait for you to care again to ask for that offering. And I think that's where it is for me.
For me, I've seen people, actually my community, probably the biggest culprit when it comes to a little bit, like going over the line, like crossing that line. Because I say this because I've seen some people wearing our traditional costume to Halloween, and it just didn't feel right. Like if you're going to a parade showcasing our culture, awesome. Like I'll be right there with you, right? If you're going to a wedding, like I'm going to Lanica's wedding, for example, but I want to like rock my Indonesian outfit, I think that's amazing, But I think, like totally disrespecting you, like I can see some people really love the culture, and then they just want to like rock this. So in Bali, the sarong, the bottom one, has this design called Prada. So like if they want to do that and they want to wear that somewhere, that's great. But if you're going to show up at a Halloween party and wear that and then wearing everything else that doesn't really go along with the outfit, I think that's crossing the line. And then another thing is, when it comes to performance, I've seen people, and there's nothing wrong with learning from YouTube. I'm just saying that if you want to learn something, but please learn something correctly, because there are certain things in traditional dance that you should do it a certain way, right? So then don't just say, I'm Balinese dancer, and then you're going to perform somewhere and you're actually not performing this traditional dance. And I'm really embarrassed to watch this, because you're Indonesian and just because you dressed the part, but you're not really performing it. So that will be, for me, crossing the line.
Yeah, you know what? And I could dig it, because we have a saying that we've been, some of the Black blues musicians, we've been discussing this. Being Black does not just automatically make you a blues musician, right? There's specific notes, there's a specific cadence that goes with it. So I definitely understand what you're saying. I'm gonna come to Tyler next. I saw Rosa shaking her head vigorously when Cinta mentioned wearing the traditional garb during Halloween. And I kind of understand where you're coming from, but I want you to tell us.
Like Cinta say, as a Mexican, do you know the traditional costume for Halloween is the man with the big hat and with the bottle? That means he's drunk all the time. So for me, that makes me feel angry, because we are not that. We are more than that. And back to the question, for me, when you are crossing the line is when you just use the traditional clothes to take a nice picture, or to have a video for likes or followers, and you don't feel really proud of that. And sometimes you didn't know where it comes from either. So for me, crossing the line is when you just use your culture or your traditionals to have fun, to make you popular, to sell something. So for me, that makes me feel so angry.
That's serious, right? And I'm going to call you the segue queen, because that's what I was going to Tyler about that, because one thing the blues and Appalachian music have in common is the fact that people put on these garbs just to appear as if they're playing a particular style of music as a exploitation, and they have no idea, right? So I would like Tyler to talk about that, because I don't like to see people in 2021 dressing like they're picking cotton just to play the blues.
Yeah, it's very true. We experience in this music a lot too. You know, I always say, if your Carhartt bibbed overalls don't have a stain on them, then you might be just wearing them for the looks, to feel like you're part of it. Not that there's anything wrong with, like you said, like dressing and wearing things from other cultures that you are not from or not part of, but you know, you need to really understand, what does it mean? What does this article of clothing mean? Or what does this music mean, or dance? And I think for me too, there are two areas that I see a lot in this region where people cross the line. One is, we have a lot of people who move into the region from other areas. They're usually particularly drawn to the culture, to the music, or to sort of like that idea that you can go back to the land here. We're not all farmers with sheep, but that is another stereotype. So we see a lot of people do that, and we see a lot of people come here and learn the music, and then they get infuriated when they're in public and they see something that a community member is doing that they may find just bewildering or even offensive to some extent. You know, I'm trying to think of like a really good example of, well, a dialect is a good thing. I hear people all the time say, I just don't understand why you all talk like that. I just, you're not even speaking right. And that, to me, that's crossing the line. Just because you're picking out the banjo tune, that doesn't give you the right to turn around and say, well, you can't even speak correctly. And then the other thing we see a lot too, I love the term culture vulture, because we have a term here that we call cultural strip miners. Strip mining is a really devastating form of coal mining, where they literally strip off the topsoil and the trees of the mountain and scoop out the coal, and then they leave this kind of moonscape. And so we often call people cultural strip miners, because they're doing a similar thing. They kind of swoop in and they take up the really digestible parts of the culture. And then oftentimes when I see them cross the line, is they take that and they make money off of that. They become a performer themselves, and they say, I spent 2 years in the backwoods of Kentucky or Virginia, and so I can show you exactly what this is about. 2 years, that's not, did you really immerse yourself? Did you really understand the struggles and the triumphs and how all of these things have layered together to create this culture? So I think for me, it's those two things. It's kind of turning around and telling the community itself, well, you've got some cool things going on, but here's a lot of bad things that you do too, and you should change them. And also just coming in and taking what little bits of the culture you want and then turning around and making money off of that.
As we know from dealing in folklore and tradition and culture, there's a lot of nuances that cross-pollinate, right, that we all have in common. And that is one that, it's they say there's truth in comedy. And a running joke in the Black community that's not really a joke is, when we see one of these things on the news or on one of the social media, and they say, well, everybody wants to be Black until it's time to be Black. That's what you just described. Everybody wants to be Appalachian. If I said it right, I know I don't say that word correctly. Please forgive me. But until it's time to be, then it's like, so I wanted to go into something more about crossing the lines, but you bring up something that's talked about in our field often, and that's this idea of coming into the community and kind of like what's a good way of putting it? What's that word? Sophisticating people, right? So it's like I'm going to learn your tradition, but while I'm learning your tradition to take part in it, I'm going to civilize you. Could you guys talk to that and the issue of that, and what suggestions we can make to kind of eradicate that?
I don't want to keep talking, but I can speak to this, I think.
Go ahead.
We see this all the time in the Appalachian region. And there are obviously benefits to outsiders moving into a region or into a culture, and culture is supposed to be this very fluid thing, that everybody can take part of, and it should transform and it should evolve as it's needed, but it also should stay true to itself, and we should stay true to ourselves as we take part in that culture. But speaking on the sophistication, I can't hardly say that, of a culture or of a people, living in the Appalachian region, we have a lot of problems. I mean, a lot of problems. And I loved what you said about everybody wants to be Appalachian until it's time to be Appalachian. And that's so true. It's really cool and trendy to play the banjo and to drink moonshine. But are you going to be here when the coal company comes knocking and says, we just bought the mineral rights to your land and you have to move, or the fracking company or the timber company or the prescription company who comes in and says, we've got a new opioid that will cure all your pains. So we see that a lot. And when my experience has been, especially with outsiders, but some insiders too, people say, oh, well, the music is great, but why is everybody on drugs? Why mine coal? That's a really easy one to address. Everybody who I've come across in these kind of scenarios, they say, you guys are so creative. You've taken all these instruments, you've taken this music, and you've created this beautiful art form. But how could you be so stupid to continue to mine coal when we know that coal is a pollutant, and we know that climate change is such a problem? And I always, I can understand that it's frustrating, but like we're speaking here, it's not black or white. There's a lot of gray area. You take a region and you deprive it of almost all other job opportunities, and you really deprive it of many other opportunities to advance oneself economically or through the social ladder. You don't have a choice but to do something like mine coal or take part in another extractive industry. And that's just all simply related to the commodification and the consumerist society that we live in. Like we were speaking earlier, oftentimes culture is kind of reined in by an outside force to keep that control over a population or over usually natural resources, whether it be in Appalachia or any other area in the world. So yeah, I've started to ramble a little bit, so I don't want to digress, but that's where it leads me to think. So
yeah, no, you're not rambling, because one side of my family was sharecroppers, right? Another side of my family were morticians. They, and then there was some that were neither and just plain farmers. And those things happen, and it's like, well, you could sing, you got a guitar. Go to Memphis, go to Chicago, and it's not that, it's not that cut and dry.
I want to answer this question talking about La Catrina, because a lot of people want to sophisticate me with this character. They want, I don't do it the traditional Catrina with the dresses like it is, because they told me maybe this is going to bring you more money. By the way, I don't do money with La Catrina, to try to keep it as the traditional. We say before that respect it is in the regional, like the dress. Maybe the meaning is not like at the beginning doing, and some people don't understand too that I go to protest with her. So this is another thing that they told me, you need to sophisticate it more.
I hear you. And that's weird. It's almost, and we haven't spoken about this as of yet, but what I hear from what you're saying, the term comes to my mind, assimilation, right? Even Tyler mentioned something similar to that, because I know there was a time in, now, mind you, please don't think I'm saying I was there, because that means I'll be a vampire. I was not there, but there was a time when there was a shift. Everyone was leaving the South, in particular people that left the South already. They wanted nothing to do with any of the traditions, from the food to the music to anything. And so the concept of assimilating was, to fit in, you have to relinquish those things. Or if you want to even present things of this nature, you have to do it in a way that is not reflective of what we were trying to forget, right?
I think my experience has been pretty similar with what Rosa has said. Is something to do with our costume. So our costume is typically with safety. We wear it with safety pins. There's no buttons. There are no zippers. So then, we would have someone who typically would parachute into the community, and then just wanting, like, maybe to have a photo op or learning a little bit of something for like a YouTube channel, but then asking, like, well, why can't we just combine this outfit with that outfit when it doesn't really go together? And then we have someone have actually rented our costume and asked, like, can I just please put the zipper on this, because it takes forever to put a safety pin on this top. And that's not, it is a part of the culture why the costume is a certain way. So they're trying to sophisticate it, making it more modern. And I understand sometimes it's just more practical, but in our case, the costume is that way because the costume, well, if you're an if you're a dancer in Indonesia, you actually supposed to wear your own costume because that that costume have your own soul and energy. So you're not supposed to really share the costume. And then it's just easier for us to use safety pins because then we can let other people share the costumes for performance sake here. But your costume, if you own it, the reason why you don't put buttons or zippers is also you're supposed to grow with your costume as you grow older. We have dancers who are 90 years old and still dance beautifully and still wear the same costume that she wears when she was 16. But it's because of this, you grow with the costume. This specific costume has its own, like energy and soul. So you just can't part with it. So you're not supposed to share. So I guess that would be my experience. I'm trying to think about like other ways of others trying to sophisticate the culture. I can't really think of anything else, but maybe Lanika have a different experience. I'm doing your job, Lamont. I'm like,
quite all right.
I've honestly been sitting here and I've been trying to think of a time when someone attempted to sophisticate anything that I've done personally. Cambodian classical dance is known as the royal court dance, so it's already something that's considered sophisticated and very like elite in terms of an art form. So I haven't actually had this experience that I can think of off the top of my head, or that I've been sitting here and trying to think of. But I can say that in terms of the work that I've done in this dance, and as I like started my own nonprofit and doing this, there's been a lot of questions of why isn't it easier to get, like, I just need a performance in a week. Why can't you get it for me? And I'm like, I have dancers who are all we all volunteer our time, and we can't just like up and like perform for you. Or if they're like, it should just be able to get up and go. And it's like, well, my costumes they're hand embroidered by someone 2 continents away, and I can't get it to them to fix it in time for you. So it's like this idea of this very complicated thing needs to be streamlined, and I've streamlined it as best as I can, but I'm very firm in that, like, I can't bend over backwards for you because you want it.
So it sounds like, Lanika, Cambodian dance, well, specifically your cultural expression that you're discussing and doing is the classical music jazz of the bunch.
Yeah, so the dance that I've learned is similar to what Cinta mentioned. It's classical court dance. It's performed in the past only for the royal family, only for the elite, and regular common people never were able to see it. They were not allowed to gaze their eyes upon it. So it's this level of dance that's just far above just regular people. So for me to be able to learn it and share it with others it's a great feat that my ancestors may roll in their graves about, or may be very proud of. I hope they're proud.
Well, that, my friend, is a great segue, because as we speak about, I have this written down, I'm sorry, negotiating cultural appropriation, community relationships, right? As we speak about being representatives and active participants, there's a piece of this puzzle we have not discussed. And that is, actually, no, I'm wrong. Tyler mentioned it. Class is a big part of the different cultures that we represent, right? Blues, ragtime, these are what some would call low to no income communities, right? So I would like the 4 of you, or maybe the 3 of you, because Lanika, you did share with us that part of it. So you were the segue. Share with us the class of community that your expression is representing. And then from there, we're going to go to the response of the people that are not part of your cultures that you teach. And they, do you have So for blues dancing, in some cases, you have blues dance groups that charge the amount of money that only middle class to higher class could participate. Then you have those that are more grounded to the people the music came from, right? Do you experience that, or do you experience the fact that if your culture deals with the common man, those that are broke, how is it received by those of a higher class? Does that make sense, ladies and gentlemen? This time, we're going to start with Cinta.
Thank you. I'm not trained for classical dances that's supposed to be performed for sultans and kings and queens in Indonesia. So I'm teaching dances that supposed to be for all people. Now in my experience learning from different master artists in Bali is very much so still strict with the caste, just like in India. So I have teachers from different caste, and then I also have to learn different dance lingos, like the different words that they would teach me. And then different teachers have different styles. So here in Philadelphia, I'm teaching my community, and I think my community in Philadelphia are more like of the lower income community, right? Like more marginalized, like we're in South Philly along with the Cambodian and Mexican community. So it's different. What I'm teaching them is what I know. So I didn't train with more of like the palace classical dancers. Like I don't have access to that. I can if I want to, but I don't have access to that because, like it's something that I just feel like it's going to take a lot of work. And I'm not in Indonesia, so it's really hard. I don't have a lot of access to that. If I want to, I'm going to have to go to Indonesia for a few years to really learn that. I feel like to be able to teach or even perform, right? Like I think Lanika learned it from your mom, I think. Was it your mom? So it's totally different. So I wish I have that access, but I don't. So I hope I answer a question. So I'm teaching dances for more of the common men, so anybody can learn this dance, and it's fine. There's no restrictions in like what class you come from.
So let me ask you, and Rosa and Tyler and Lanika, even though you answered the question already, I want you to answer this. Does the class of community of the people that the tradition comes from that you teach and express with and for, what kind of relationship does that constitute with the community? Is it different? Is it the same?
There's just a little different in my case with a character of La Catrina. When I have the opportunity to go to the museums and galleries, because they ask me more about where this character come from, what's the story, and this kind of questions. And when I have the opportunity to go with my community and churches, festivals, or something like that, they just are impressed with the character, and they don't ask me questions like where it comes from or something like that. For me, this is the only difference, but like my friends say, I don't have any choice to go any place for high class or low class. For me, everyone's are the same. So I think I'm never going to put, I just go there because they are more sophisticated or more high class, something like that. Or, I don't want to go to the church festival because something like that. No, for me, that doesn't work.
I hear you. Tyler.
I think about class a lot, especially in this music. This music is primarily from working class people and lower class people. Many of even if you look at the music or the dances that we call traditional in Appalachian music, the music and dances that have been around for a couple of 100 years now, those have even come from working class communities that were migrating or being forced to migrate into the American colonies. So it's definitely something that's in my mind a lot. And I'm really excited. This talk is happening just a couple of days before this camp that I help coordinate and teach at happens next week, called Mountain Music School. This is a camp. We're in our 16th year, and I was there as a student a long time ago, and several years ago come on staff there. And one of my favorite things about this camp is it is still one of the most affordable traditional music camps probably in the United States, in the whole United States. And I'm so grateful because even today, if you are under 18, you have to write us a simple 1-paragraph essay about why is it you want to come and learn about old-time Appalachian music, and we will give you a scholarship to come to the camp for free. And that covers everything. And one of the founders, who's such a mentor of mine, Suella Boatwright Wells, her father was a banjo player. And while she didn't play music or dance, she really saw the importance of our culture and what it could do for a community. She was really adamant that we do that we let pretty much almost every child under 18 come for free. And along with that, she created this entire system where we borrow hundreds of instruments to loan out for the week, because it's not cheap to learn any type of new hobby, but it's particularly not cheap to get a child interested in music. And folks all the time, that's one of the biggest barriers for them, particularly in our region. Their child wants to learn music, but a decent beginner's instrument is at least $500. And for some people, that could be rent or a car payment or whatever that they need for the month. So it's very important to me to be involved in programs like that really reach out and offer people a viable way to take part in their culture in an authentic way, but in a way that, they can afford, that doesn't, cause them to miss a meal or to not pay a bill. And to speak to your second question about how does like an upper class react, I think at least regionally here, even folks who are of a higher income level or a higher socioeconomic status, they most of the time still feel really proud of the music. Especially, I think it's something that's so closely ingrained with the identity of the Appalachian region, and it's also like, I hate to say palatable, but music is one of the more palatable elements of Appalachia. Whereas when you say things like coal mining, that's very polarizing. Or if you think about oftentimes the deep religious practices of the region, that can be polarizing for people. Whereas music, for the most part, can just make you tap your toes and clap along. So I think, at least with speaking to the music, it is generally seen as a positive thing across class, but of course not every class can access it. So
for my culture, as I mentioned, classical dance used to be very elite, and throughout time has gotten more accessible. And that's due to changes in culture through the centuries, but also colonialization of the French coming to Cambodia and tourism of other countries to Cambodia. So it's so much more easily accessible. And my goal when I'm teaching is to make it as accessible as possible. So we do try to charge for class. It's like $25 to take an entire school year's worth of weekly lessons with us. And that's just so we can buy hand sanitizer and a t-shirt for you. And it's really like, that's it. Like, we're not, I think for myself and other artists, especially in like culture and folk art, it's really just about making it accessible and making it something that's still relevant. And that's really where like I get paid, is like the joy of it. But in terms of like across class, a lot of our students are low income. Our community here in Philadelphia, we're just, a lot of us are just entering into middle class, but a lot of us started out as no to low income, right? Like, we came to the United States with nothing. My mother came in flip-flops when it was snowing, and that's what she had, and that's how we started our journey here. And it's important to ensure that we make this form accessible to everyone, and then when we go and we do meet the folks with the money, they're not gonna get the discount. That's just how it rolls. Like, if you want a performance and you're community based and it's open to the public and it's for everyone, all the discounts. But if it's private and this is just something that you want for you, it can't be as flexible. So it's just one of those things where it's like that's the relationship there between us and class.
That leads to another question. Paying to learn these cultures, right? Now, realistically, living in America in a capitalist society, we all have bills to pay. We possibly have people to take care of, et cetera, et cetera. So please understand the question that I'm asking. I'm not being insulting, and I'm definitely not being delusional that we can do things without being paid. But in the theory of what we're discussing, is it right to sell tradition, one? And the second part of that question, or the B part of that question, would be, is it worse or equivalent when an outsider repackages it and sells it?
To piggyback on what Lanika said, if this is something that we want to give back to the community, it has to be fully accessible to the community. So I think Lanika also received this Leeway Art and Change grant in 2015. I started Moderator with just 3 people who were just passionate about learning Indonesian dance. 2 were Indonesians and 1 was not Indonesian, who just, this person was just very passionate. They just come to learn with me, and then we just started this dance group. And then, so I thought, nobody was teaching this in South Philly. So this is something that I can give to the community. I've been through so many life changes. That's why I moved to Philadelphia, and I feel like the community was taking care of me. So I thought, this is how I can contribute back by opening a class. So I received a grant in 2015, and that's when I started teaching free dance classes for the community, traditional Indonesian dance. And then that was the first year ever the community had our first flag raising ceremony at City Hall in Philadelphia with dances, from the community and everything. So we continued to do that. So from then, I started charging very minimal amount, because sometimes when it's free, people don't appreciate it, and then they don't want to dedicate the time. So I did that, not because I don't get paid a lot of money. Like, all that money goes to paying studio rent, right? Because we have to rent a studio. There's no way I'm going to have this in my apartment in South Philly. So that's what I did. It was like $5, and then it grew into $10. But then now, because of the pandemic, we switched to Zoom. I just use my own money to pay for a Zoom account and not charging anybody, because people in the community expressed that they still want to continue to do this with me and the other teachers. So we started doing that. Even to this day, we're teaching for free, because we also get help from different organizations. Like Philadelphia Folklore Project is one of the organizations who made me an artist. I was a dancer. I didn't think I was an artist, but Philadelphia Folklore Project told me, no, you're doing this. You're the only person doing this. So you are actually an artist. You are a traditional Indonesian dance artist, and it really helped me to become the artist I am today. And then there are many other organizations who helped in Philly. We're so blessed to be in Philly, that say, use my space. So, for things like that, I'm very grateful, and we try not to charge. Now, for other people, and we've seen this a lot, we see people approach us and say, we want you to come to our holiday party and perform your dance. One of my biggest pet peeve is performing during someone eating, because you're not really paying attention to my culture. We're like entertainers, like we're like the circus. You're just kind of like, yeah, great, clap hands. So I don't really like that. But we get approached from a few people saying like, hey, let's do this production of your dancers doing all these things, and then we can have like this production in Center City and then charge all this amount of money, but it just doesn't feel right. I don't think that's right at all. And then we try to stay away from that. But then again, following what Lanika said, if someone wants to hire us for a private event, we're definitely going to charge them, because from one person to get dressed in a traditional costume with the whole hair and makeup, that's at least half an hour. And then you want 4 people, and then you said, oh yeah, I have $50. That's really offensive. Like, just the time, all these costumes are authentic from Indonesia. If you ever look at Rosa's dress in La Catrina, like the time she put on the makeup, like sometimes people just don't appreciate the time, and then they said, oh, we'll pay you with exposure. I'm sure, Tyler, you hear this, like, oh, you get exposed. Like, yeah, but exposures don't pay the bill. Like, it doesn't pay our studio. So that would be my response.
No, I hear you and I feel you. And I mean, just as a blues cat, try not to call myself a musician when you hear some of these folks play. They're great, but there's moments where you're in an intimate setting and they're getting the entire experience, and then there's moments where you're hollering your blues and people are just drinking and talking, and then you have to say to yourself, am I going to tell everybody to shut up, or am I just going to just keep playing, and go home with like $5? But that's neither here nor there. So I have a couple more questions, but if we have time, I'm going to get to a very important question for the 4 of you. The reason why I say if I have time, because we have a couple of questions from the attendees. The first question is from the brilliant, she's going to get mad when I say this, the brilliant Dr. Marilyn White. She told me don't call her Dr. Marilyn White, but I have to because I honor you. How you doing? She asked this question to Cinta. It just went up. Hold on. There we go. If you're not a master, what defines what that is? Is there a way that you would know when you reach this level?
Thank you. I just don't see myself as a master artist because I feel like I'm continue to learn. And then I just, I guess if I go to Indonesia, I'm way below all these other artists in Indonesia. So I just want to stay humble and then, telling people I'm still a student myself. But here in Pennsylvania, really, I think I am now recognized as a master artist for specific dances. And then that's also because I've applied for apprenticeship grants from the Pennsylvania culture. Why can't I think about the Pennsylvania culture of the arts? Is that right? So I get recognized as a master artist, and I teach, I teach at schools, I teach in different venues. So people do recognize me as a master artist in the community. They do recognize that. I just don't see myself, I don't call myself a master artist because I want to continue to learn. Every time I go to Indonesia, that's what I do for 2 months. Well, not for 2 months, for a month. That's what I learn. And then I continue learning from here too. That's why.
Well, you're a master in our book. Caesar has a question for any one of you on the panel. Regarding the gray area on cultural appropriation, how do you feel about an outsider taking a leading role on teaching cultural aspects?
I do think that's okay. Often there have been times, not often, but there have been times when somebody will say something to me about like being a cultural gatekeeper. And I really don't like that term because then it makes it sound like I get to be exclusionary and say, well, you're not quite there yet, but you over there, you've got it. And that's not the role that I want to play. And also that's not the role that like that I should have. I really appreciated what Cinta was saying about like always feeling like a student. I feel that way as well. I've been doing this music and this dance for 14 or 15 years now, since I was a young teenager, but I still feel like I've got a lifetime to learn. But I do think that those that grow up, even if they don't grow up in the culture or the tradition, if they're willing to take the time to immerse themselves and to learn why this is important, and to see the art form's connection to the daily life of the individuals that it comes from, why is it important? Like, what does it have to do with how they get up and go to work, or how they go and worship, or any of that? If they're willing to take the time to truly understand that, and then with that is to turn around and make sure that their students are not doing what we were speaking of earlier, like they're just taking the palatable parts and then saying, well, this is it. If they're willing to make sure that others understand it in that same way, in that deep, meaningful way, then I think it's okay.
So we have a couple more questions. That was a great answer. I just want to throw in a quick question before we get to the other two attendees' questions, based on what based on what both you and Cynthia just said. Because there's a such thing called a purist, right? We've dealt with that, and I would imagine a purist could be quantified as a gatekeeper to some degree. Does the purist do a disservice to community relationships in what we're doing? And I'm asking for a short answer this time because I have to get to the. I just threw that one in.
Yes, I would say yes.
I wish we can go into that. I really wish we, but I want to get so. Actually, ironically enough, since this is another question for you from Kay. Do you see any intra-Indonesian, within Indonesia, cultural appropriation going on? Ooh, great question. For example, do you see, Palmanoians learning and maybe even appropriating Javanese dance, or if a Sumerian person?
Sumatran, maybe?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Appropriate or repackage Balinese dance?
If I've seen that, yes. I haven't, of course, I've been living here, right, since 1999, so I don't know about Indonesia, but here in the US, have I seen that? Yes, absolutely. I'll give you an example. I talked about earlier about some people dressing the part, performing Balinese dance, but they're actually in my book, not really performing Balinese dance because there's no posture, there's no hand gestures and things like that. And then another thing is, if you are performing Balinese dance and there are certain things, if Sumatran dance, because there's a lot of, depending on which part of Sumatra, but Sumatran dance really are the dances that would wear longer sleeves because there's a lot of Muslim influence there. And then I know some of that dances too. So if you're going to perform that dance, please wear the appropriate costumes. You can't just perform and just wearing whatever, right? And then certain colors also mean certain things. So I've seen that they just want to perform these things for the sake of performing and getting on stage, and then but appropriating that specific culture. This has been a big contradiction in my community too, because there was a question with, can someone who's wearing hijab perform Balinese dance? When you perform Balinese dance, we show our shoulders, right? And then it's almost like a tube top. That's how the culture is. Can someone who wears hijab learn that culture? Absolutely. You should, if you want to. Can that person perform it? Absolutely. But, and then there's a but, depends on what's the purpose of the performance. If you're really performing it and then you really truly wants to really showcase the culture, then maybe that person, we can say to that person, if that my student, and I do have students who are like that, and I have a conversation with them, well, you can definitely perform this, and then but you can perform this at this one event. But for this specific event, I'm going to have, ABC performing at this event. There's ways to do that because you truly want to showcase, if the Indonesian president come to the US and we want to showcase this group, we're going to have to select the right people. But if they're going to perform for the community, absolutely, why not? Come learn the culture. So yes, it happens in the community a lot, especially in the US. I've seen this. I travel all over from West Coast to East Coast, and I've seen how people in my own community appropriate the culture.
Would I be taking it too far? Would I be crossing the line if I say American culture is based on appropriation and exploitation? No one wants to answer that question. Oh my goodness. Okay, all right. So here's another question, which I believe is the last question from our attendees. Then I'm going to give you guys one quick question until they tell me to pull the plug. I'm believing this is for all panelists, whoever wants to answer, because there's no specific name on this particular question. When did you feel ready to represent the community with your art? Did you ever feel like you weren't fully accepted or embraced by the community? Ooh, great question.
In my case, I've been 9 years of folklore dance and 1 year of Aztec dance and 3 years doing the characterization of La Catrina. For me, I never feel ready to represent my culture or my traditions, but all the people start to tell me I'm a representative of my culture. So it's hard for me, like Cinta said before, the people call me artist or that I'm doing this for my culture, because at the beginning I never do it with this purpose. I do it because I want to learn, because I'm a learning people all the time, and I want to share this with my children. But when the community of people start to tell me, oh, I like the things you do, the things you share in your Facebook or your Instagram, that makes me feel a little more, I don't know how to say, a little more important, the things I share, because that means people are see me, and that's why I'm trying to do as the original I can with my culture, my dances, and the characterization of La Catrina. So for me, I never be ready to be sharing culture, but until the people told me I'm doing that.
I dig it. I feel you, and I definitely understand that, because it is a big responsibility, right? What we're doing. So I have a question. I believe we're running out of time. And this is, again, I like to give 2-part loaded questions, because this can't be too easy for y'all, okay? This being a lifestyle, a culture, something lived, breathed, and all these things. One, could we as those that are actively transmitting this be so close to it that we take things too sensitively? That's the first part, right? And sensitively meaning pretty much what we're talking about. If someone may not be appropriating, but we're just like, because we're just breathing it. The second part about that is, because we live it, breathe it, eat it, sleep it, dance it, sing it, write grants, teach classes, do workshops, try to stay in slightly as much shape as we can to perform. Do we have a balance? Are we living our best life? Are we making sure that we're healthy? Those are the 2 questions that I would like to ask. Go ahead.
I feel attacked by that question of, am I living a balanced life? I feel like you just saw directly into my soul and said, that's unbalanced, because it is. I don't know how to live a balanced life, because it's not just like, oh, I'm a dance teacher, but like, I'm still Cambodian. Like, this is I watch these videos for fun and I listen to the music and my entire family does it. So it's one of those things where like I don't know what the balance is, or am I trying to balance in a way that isn't representative of my identity, right? Like, am I trying to fit within a scale that actually doesn't measure my identity correctly? And I've, like, as like a young professional, like I have a 9-to-5 that pays for me to be able to do these things during my 6 to 8. So I'm just like, it's one of those things where like I try to balance, but it's so hard. And I totally forgot your first question simply because I felt so attacked about the balance.
The first question was, are we so into it, so close to it, that we may be sensitive to things that may not be appropriation? It could possibly be insensitive, or, you know, something like that.
Sure. I can answer for myself. Yes. I think there was mention like folks learning from YouTube, and it hurts my heart when I hear about local groups learning from YouTube when I'm right here, and I try to be as accessible as possible because I'm like, I'm right here. Like, I'm not the greatest master and like I don't know everything, but like I can teach you that dance in person. And I have these moments with my husband where like I just vent. I'm like, I can't believe they're doing that. They're not doing it right. It looks like YouTube. I can tell it's YouTube. And then like I like have to like woosah, and that's like my balance, right? Where I'm like, but they want to learn their culture. They want to do these things. Let me take a break. Let me message them on Facebook and just like connect with them. But I get really sensitive. I get really worked up about it.
So everybody seems to be agreeing. I agree. And I was able to pretty much list your behavior because I too share the same behavior. No, with that being said, is that why being that adamant and that close and that passionate to what we all do, why you feel that you guys are the right ones to build that community relationship and be that representative for said tradition?
I don't know if that's why. I think we're sort of not chosen even, right? We're the only ones probably in our respective community doing this. So I don't want to say like we are the person, you know, we're the only one. So for my, you know, like I guess I should speak for myself. Like I'm the only one teaching, and then I feel you, Lanika. Like, you know, I see that too. How people learning from YouTube. Yeah, I get super sensitive when people don't wear the right costume, because I use my own money to buy authentic costume. So, you know, or maybe sometimes I get grants to buy some costume. So like I get really, you know, offended when someone's not performing the culture the way it should be performed. But yeah, I don't, you know, to answer your question, I don't think I can say, well, I am, you know, the person that should be, you know, everybody should come to. No, I don't think so. But we're the one that's doing the work.
And you know something, at the end of the day, that's really all that matters, right? And you have the urgency to keep a community relationship, right? I thank you, PFP, for inviting me to sit with these brilliant people. I love what they do. I love what they stand for. And it's always great to meet someone just as crazy as you are, so you don't feel alone in this world. I appreciate everything. I hope you all that watched and listened, whether you were here or on a live stream, if not learned anything, we're inspired to take your narrative by the horns and do something with it. Because that's really for me, that's what it's all about. Own your narrative, preserve your narrative, share your narrative. And you can find me all over the place. Just look up Lamont Jack Pearley or the African American folklorist or Jack Dappa Blues. I will be right there. Keep bluesing.
I can go next if you'd like. Again, I just want to say thank you as well. This has been so insightful and so wonderful to meet all of you all and get a glimpse into the mediums that you work in. So it's been really great. And I would just kind of piggyback on what Jack was saying about Lamont and Jack. About just encouraging people to get out there and try an art form. I think sometimes these kind of conversations might intimidate people because then they have that fear, well, I don't want to be an appropriator. And that's okay to have that fear, but don't let it stop you from getting out there. There are so many people. I can only speak for my own kind of musical community, but I'm sure it is the same in all of these places, that there are so many welcoming people who are ready to teach you and to stand beside you and say, this is how it is done. This is an authentic way to present this. So just seek those people out, seek those leaders out in your arts community and go for it.
I just want to say thank you for inviting me to this panel. I was very nervous because the English is not my first language. So I hope all the things I say you can understand. And especially because it's about my culture, my traditions. And like Taylor said, I want to be a representing of that. And I want to continue learn and someday maybe teach some students the things I'm doing right now. So thank you so much.
I just want to say thank you so much. I am so honored to be able to share this virtual space with the other artists that are here in Lamont for facilitating this conversation. I was very nervous to come on just because I have a lot of opinions and sometimes you ramble like I'm doing right now, but I just want to remind folks that a lot of our good learning happens when we are uncomfortable, and I was uncomfortable tonight, but I learned a lot. So when you do go out into your own art practice or a new hobby in art practice, just remember that bit of uncomfortable is going to be a great place for you to learn, and just make sure that when you're learning, you're safe and the folks around you are safe. And thank you again.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's just so nice to have other fellow artists who share the same experience. Thank you, Lamont, for being an awesome moderator. And then Tyler, wish you were closer so we can learn square dancing, because I love dancing everything. But hopefully we get to see each other in person soon. So I'm just really grateful to be here and then to be included. You don't hear a lot about Indonesian culture other than in university. So, just to be here and be included, it's something that's just very meaningful to me. So thank you, PFP, as always. And I want to thank Madhu too for Madhu, you're not showing your video, but Madhu is here. But thank you for there you go, for encouraging us, PFP, to have this conversation. It's been super great.
A big thank you to Madhu and also to Eric from our staff. And there's one more panel. So on August 5th, we're going to be rounding out this series with a panel. We've had 3 panels with incredible artist voices. And, I think that's how the emphasis should be. But we decided to round out the 4th one with voices from arts administration and folklore. So people actually working in organizations, particularly with questions about how we distribute resources, how we engage in some of these issues with like purist debates and cultural appropriation and authenticity and all these really uncomfortable topics, and how that gets even more uncomfortable, obviously, when there are resources floating around, right? And so I think in applied folklore and in arts administration, we hope, and I think wrongly assume sometimes, that we're always on the right side of history, or we're always fighting the good fight. And that is the goal, but I think that things can get very confusing very quickly. So we're looking forward to a really interesting conversation from that perspective. And I hope that you all and our audience will join us on August 5th for the final installment of this technical assistance series.